Well, it's not all sunshine and rainbows in the Italy camp either, is it, Miles? Because there's been some controversy there with Sandro Tonali and Nicolo Zaniolo both being sent home from the camp under investigation for using illegal betting websites as well. I don't know much about this story, but you've been reading into it. How much of a shadow does this cast over the Italy camp? And I mean, there's a question there really about just gambling in football generally, isn't there? Because it's not the first issue we've had with players and gambling. Generally, is it, over the last couple of years? But where does this leave Italy, and what do you know about the story?
So that's a good. The second part of that question is a good one, because the answer is not much, and no one really knows much about it. It's still very up in the air. There's been a few contrasting reports that have come out, but let me caveat anything I say with, it's all very alleged at this stage and we don't know too much more. But I will give you a bit of a rundown on it, because I think it's been quite underreported in England, which is a bit of a surprise when the two players involved both play their domestic football in England at the moment. So it's connected to a Juventus midfielder, a young Juventus midfielder, I think he's 22, Nicolo Fagioli, who has been under investigation as well for betting activity, has quite openly come out and said he has a gambling addiction and put himself forward for investigation after it kind of came out that there was some knowledge of this. In investigating that, supposedly there is communication between him and Sandro Tonali and him and Nicolo Zaniolo where they talk quite openly about some of their betting activity. The only stumbling block I've got in terms of actual knowledge about this is the reports about the two players' involvements are massively different. So Tonali's camp have come out and suggested that Tonali himself has a gambling addiction as well. They've not commented on whether he's made any bets on football, particular games he's involved in. They've not said anything like that, but they have said that he has a gambling addiction as well. Whereas Zaniolo's camp have come out and outright denied it and said that there is no activity that's taken place with him. The only thing that he does is play online poker. And the issue comes around, supposedly, the sites and the companies that they've been using to do this are illegal companies, registered by legal companies and domains, but then a separate platform to encourage activity from illegal users, which is a very complicated market that I don't know that much about. I'm not going to get that into, but it's a shame because, again, it clouds Italian football, and it feels like there's very often a scandal that clouds Italian football. It's not that far gone that we think about Calciopoli and the impact that that had on Serie A in particular. And now we've got two players that have just achieved big moves to England, particularly in Tonali's case, where it's for huge amounts of money. And now they're wrapped up in something that could result in up to a 3-year ban. The punishment is much stricter in Italy than it is in England. So someone like Ivan Toney got 8 months. If I'm right, then if you are found to be guilty of betting on your own club, then it can be up to 5 years. And Zaniolo, the contrasting reports are, there are some reports saying that he not only made bets, but made bets on Roma games that he was playing in or on the bench for, which could be huge. Now, the repercussions for his club sides are a bit different there because he's only on loan at Aston Villa, but it's still huge for his career. And this is a young footballer who I'd be devastated to see caught up in something like that. And I think that opens up the wider conversation that we want to have a bit, Mike, isn't it? About where football and betting stand. We've talked about this before, obviously, because there's been a really big case in England with Ivan Toney. You've also had conversations, Mike, haven't you, about the impacts that mental health within the game has on people, and addiction is a really serious part of that. And betting and gambling, I think a lot of people quite, I would say ignorantly, look at footballers betting and criticize them and say, you've got enough money, why'd you get involved in this? And actually, I think there's a wider conversation on how these addictive things can pretty much ruin lives. Like this young Juventus midfielder, there's talk that he was betting up to 100 grand in a couple of months. And he's not someone that's going to be on astronomical wages, and he's a young player and essentially could have written off a lot of his career now. So where do football and gambling sort of stand right now? And I don't know, I'm interested in what you two think about where football needs to be a bit stricter in these areas, personally.
I don't think it helps at all that every single other team has got a gambling outfit on their shirts as a sponsor. You know, billboards are filled with gambling sponsorships, and the amount of money coming into the game from gambling companies makes it almost hypocritical to even try and, you know, criticize players for being caught up in it, because they've got this toxic combination of having a heck of a lot of money, a lot of free time on their hands as well, quite often, because, you know, they're traveling for long periods. They're usually either on their own or rooming with teammates, and they're bored. They need a rush, they need a kick. And I think from a mental health point of view, if they do put a bet on and it's an innocent bet and it comes through and it's quite a bit of money, it's a little side hustle for them. It's that extra kick they need in between match days. That's current players, and I think former players even more dangerous as well, because they miss the kick they get from match days and from the dressing room. They have still got some money, so when they have retired, it's an even bigger danger for ex-pros to get caught up with gambling as well, because you're still trying to find that rush and that kick, and you're still involved with the game. And, you know, you can see potentially how your knowledge could benefit you financially in that realm. And it's a dangerous combination, and there's no protection for players at all. And from a mental health point of view, you're right, Myles, it's seen as something that they should be above because they're on more money, but they're not doing it for financial gain necessarily. It's for a lot of other reasons. It's to fill a hole in their lives or something like that. And it's a difficult thing to kind of police as well, because they can do it whenever and wherever they want. And I guess you only really know somebody's struggling when they financially look like they're struggling as well, and it's hitting them hard. And for a professional football player in the Premier League, to see them struggling financially would be bloody hard, because they earn a lot of money. So it goes undetected for long periods.
Yeah, you're talking about young men who, the majority of them, don't really come from wealth, and all of a sudden are thrust into the limelight with excessive amounts of money they don't really know what to do with half the time.
Yeah.
And then the industry that they're in heavily promotes this activity, this pastime, this lifestyle, and then we're surprised when they buy into it. I just think it's mental. Yeah. Villa have got a betting sponsor on the front of their shirts this year. Like, they can't complain at Zaniolo for getting involved in it. Now, obviously, there is further moral scrutiny when it comes to, are you looking at match fixing? I think that's a completely different conversation then. And I also think that there's heavier levels of scrutiny for the fact that this is an illegal website that they're supposedly using, because what that then goes to fund and what that could inject into society can be really problematic, because a lot of the times these sites are geared up to support wider criminal operations that could be really dangerous. And it is irresponsible, but we are leading young men down a path, and women too in football now, that's kind of gaining more sponsorship traction as well. This is an industry that is taking over a global sport, and yet it feels like you kind of hang the players out to dry and chastise them for being involved in the exact thing you're trying to sell. I just find that a mental conversation. And now you've got three actually, young professionals with a massive career ahead of them, integral to Italy's hopes at the Euros, for example, and really doing things in their football career that they're at new heights, it feels like. This is someone that was in a Champions League semi-final last year with Tonali and has just achieved a huge move to Newcastle. And his future feels under scrutiny now. If you've got a 3-year ban, what do Newcastle do with an investment like that?
Yeah.
Like, it's difficult, isn't it? Is that the right answer for someone?
I think it's definitely, for instance, I think it's definitely desensitised the general public. I think they definitely desensitised in terms of, they just think that players, obviously, they've got a lot of money, their status that they carry, that they should know better. And for me, that's the wrong way to look at it. I think also you've got to explore sort of, you mentioned about maturity of these young people. That has a massive impact on decision making. But also, I suppose it almost feels like they're making an investment, and they're investing their time into something that almost becomes a hobby. And there's a sense of reward there that when they obviously do win, and then you kind of raveled in almost a big routine where you constantly, pumping money in, losing it, getting it back, and it's so dangerous for me. And it definitely it's a massive thing really that needs to be looked at, and I feel like there needs to be more support there for players, because it seems like there's an issue. It's something that's dominating news more and more often. And
it's support more than anything, I think, and just financial advice generally. I don't think young footballers, when they're thrust into that much money quite soon, they're given that any advice at all, unless they've got a very astute agent. I think if they're surrounded by wrong-uns, like a few footballers are, then they can easily be led astray. And I think clubs have got a duty of care to protect young players, I think, from getting trapped in that kind of web of trouble, if you like. And that, gambling's one of the, I guess it's one of the lesser addictions, if you like, in terms of like being life threatening. Like you wouldn't know it was harming anybody physically, but mentally it's one of the worst.
I mean, it's bordering on it's a compulsion, isn't it?
Yeah,
for a lot of people.
And actually, the knock-on effects then of, like we talk about the mental health aspects, it is a really dangerous one. It is life-threatening for some people. It tears families apart. And
but what I mean is physically, you can't see somebody who's addicted to gambling.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I think it's difficult because then you have people like Ivan Toney who have been caught up in it in this country and then presents his case in a very different way in British press. And then it's kind of harder to understand. I don't want to be overly critical of him, but I feel like the conversation he had around his suspension didn't really give that much of an honest account of it. And actually that buries the problem slightly. And there's really contrasting reports coming out about what Zaniolo was saying. There's half of them that's completely denying it. And then there are reports saying that actually it's more serious with him and we'll never get to the bottom of those problems. And actually it's bigger than that individual. It really is. And it needs to be a bit of a wider conversation. So it's really sad to see. Italy have obviously sent both players home.
Yeah.
They say for their protection. And I actually think that's probably true as well, because the investigation is ongoing. They've been sent back to their clubs, but will have to appear in front of a magistrate at some point. Who knows where this will go, but it's one to keep an eye on, definitely, because we could be talking about really, really lengthy bans for two big names.